a reverb decay time that the last note was still decaying as the last car was leaving the parking lot and out to here. So that's just the worst nightmare. So no, I will not go Julio on you.
That's nice.
I will stay close.
That's nice. I've seen so many singers just back away from the mic and bring their voice down at the same time. So that high note, you just don't hear it. Go, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm always looking at the song, and I do believe I heard that on a night that you were doing the sound, and I was looking at you and I was saying, man, he must be freaking out.
I on a regular basis, yeah.
Well, what do you know? The Backstage Cowboys podcast is back on the air. It's been a while, hasn't it? Well, it was Christmas, and I took some time off. I don't see anything wrong with that, right? By the way, there's the USITT thing coming up in Louisville, Kentucky. I'll be there at the Spotlight booth, and I hope you're going to come down and meet me so that we can get acquainted, see who you are, see who I am, whatever that means. Okay, who do we have on this episode? Richard Forte. Good friend of mine, Richard, FOH sound guy. Born in Cuba, raised in New York, and moved to Montreal for some reason. This guy has got a lot of stories to tell. It was an amazing interview. I just loved it. I would have taken another 2 hours of it. This has got to be the longest running interview I've ever done. And well worth it. Believe me, stick till the end. You're going to get a kick out of this one. Do I have a band? Oh, God. You guys back from vacation yet? All right, cue it. Let's go. Now.
Here we are back in my office in Saint Laurent, Quebec. We did this crappy setup here because I forgot half my stuff at home. I've been playing the bass lately, and I've been using my kit to play the bass more than recording podcasts because it was Christmas time and I took some time off. I have, can I say Richie or Richard? What's the best?
Richard Forte is on my website.
Yeah.
Friends call me Richie.
Okay.
Everybody, I think if you refer to me as Richard in this town, people may kind of
not know what I'm talking about.
They may not, but Richie and baseball caps are kind of in the same category. You reach a certain age where guys just shouldn't wear baseball caps at a certain point, and so I started to use Richard more, but there's still a lot of stuff in print with Richie. So Richie. Take your pick because me, we're friends. You call me Richie.
Okay. Anyway, it's fortesound.com, so whatever. I like Richie because it's been Richie for years for me. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to start by saying that Richard Forte in front of me, I'm going to be official just for this once, has started doing sound a long time ago, and I do believe that shortly after they invented the speaker or something like that, right? And before we start, I want to apologize for the crappy mic stand. As I said, I left my stuff at home, and I even forgot my mic holder, so I'm actually talking into a crappier mic than you. Like, you got the crappy mic stand, and I got the crappy mic. So, we're even now. And funny enough, to me, we sound the same, but...
Yeah, well...
But what do I know about sound?
The thud you hear will be the failure of the mic stand. I think we're okay.
Yeah, well, we like life stuff, so that's all good. So, Richie, I'm so glad to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
I'm very happy to be here.
And we had a debate whether we were doing this here or at your house, and it all depended on the coffee, I believe, or something. We're actually drinking coffee. This is a first for me. Normally, it's wine or beer, and we decided to behave on this one. For some reason.
Yeah, we'll get to the B stories, accompanied with the right spirit at some other time.
We've been on several gigs together. I was going through your website, fortesound.com, and I saw something that made me smile. I saw Nikki Janowski. I know you've been working with her. I did her, I think what was her first full-scale show at Place des Arts many years ago. She was just a kid. I mean, I don't even know if she was 12 at the time.
You know what? Before the Place des Arts show, she opened the Montreal Jazz Festival, the Festival International de Jazz, the youngest artist to ever open the show. She was show one, outdoors next to the big stage, not on the big stage, but she literally kicked off the that year's festival, and she was, I think, 11 years old. Okay. And that was pretty much her official launch. Okay. Under her banner with her band. Wow. I was there. I've been there since that show.
Oh, so you've been doing all of her gigs?
Yeah. Well, she's currently on hiatus, kind of between projects. Mm-hmm. Not very active at the moment, so I consider myself on hiatus too, as opposed to no longer working with her.
Okay.
I fingers crossed that she takes some time and comes back strong, which I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a great artist, and it's been fun watching her grow up, because they're from 11 to now she's like 23.
23, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's been great having a front row seat for that.
Yeah, isn't that great? We have some phenomenons coming out of Montreal here, and we have the possibility of working with these people and watching them grow internationally.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I've traveled all over with her, and what's great about Nikki is that over the years she's had gone through so many different styles of music and format, everything from like a 3-piece, 4-piece jazz, like a jazz trio, to full symphony orchestras and rhythm sections, and in major concert halls and in locations, really unlikely locations, like at the foot of the Library of Ephesus in Turkey. Wow. Which is this historical, just a breathtaking backdrop for an outdoor performance.
Yeah.
They don't do many, because these ruins are, they're very delicate, mm-hmm. and that kind of traffic, they don't do a lot of those. And we had the good fortune of playing an outdoor show right at the library.
Wow.
In the ruins. It was beautiful.
That's cool. Hey, you know what, Richie? Normally when I do these interviews, I have like a set of questions in front of me, just in case we kind of go blank on something. In this case, I did not print a set of questions, because I don't think we will need that. In your particular case, I think we have a lot more stuff to talk about than any questions I might have. But I'm
glad you're inspired.
Very. I do have two specific questions, though. I'd like to first of all, I'd like to know what you're up to now, what you're doing at the moment, and I'd like to know how it all started.
Okay. Currently, I'm pretty much holding the same pattern of the last couple of years, where I have a small but reliable client base of corporate bands and regional sound companies that I'm fortunate enough to have gained their trust and made my way to the top of the first call list. And so between the 4 or 5 different clients, I'm working very steady, and not steady in the sense of a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday.
Nobody does that in this business.
Nobody does that. Exactly. It's just so strange, because I guess by definition, when you're working at the end of the year, because as you know, first quarter, it's slow. There's mm-hmm. really not a lot of shows, especially because of the weather. So many cancellations. You try to do a tour of Canada in the winter, and you're going to lose a lot of money, because you're not going to make all the dates, and you're going to be refunding tickets, and and trucks are going to break down. It's just a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So this is the slow period. So this is my vacation time. Mm-hmm. But come March, that's when things pick up all the way till December. Like by the end of March till December, things start getting pretty busy.
So August doesn't drop anymore. Like when I was active, like more active, let's say, on the on-call thing many years back, August was also a quiet period. But I think that's over now, right?
Interestingly enough, there is a dip in August, but this August was really cool because one of my clients got a corporate contract to provide the entertainment for 2 private cruises. And this, a really big company. I don't think I'm allowed to mention the company, but needless to say, the ships were major, like frontline, very well-known cruise ships, and with a capacity of 35 to 4,500 people, and there were only 1,500 to 1,800 people on the ship, and everything was open to everybody.
Wow.
And there was entertainment every night, and the band would break down into several different components. We'd have like the big show was like on the first day, and on the last day, like with the full band. And the other nights, the band would break down into, jazz, cocktail, 4-piece power rock, in different venues on the ship. And they brought a sound company from New Jersey to provide for the Caribbean cruise. It was a company out of Jersey, and they brought I think one of them, or maybe they were both, L-Acoustic and Yamaha, and just really proper production. And that was a lot of fun because we had the days off, and the second cruise was in the Mediterranean through Italy. So days off was like Rome, Naples, Corsica, just get off the ship. And then, you come back and you do like an hour show. And that was really cool. And both of those were in August.
Okay.
So that was the exception. But normally, August does slow down, but what perfect timing for a gig like this, where you get to, it's kind of like a working vacation.
Yeah.
So that worked out really well this year.
Oh, that's cool. And all right, so let's go back to the beginning and work our way up. I'd like to understand where you're coming from. What's your background? How it all started? How'd you get into this mess? This line of work.
Oh, that's boy, it really comes down to influences, I guess. First and foremost, I'm the youngest of 3, and the middle brother, the one that I was shared, close quarters, me and him in a very small room. My brother George had impeccable taste in music in the 60s and 70s. He was really listening to the best of the best. And I was 5 years younger and really didn't have any awareness to music at all, except for the albums that he would bring home. And he would play constantly and constantly threaten me with bodily harm if I went anywhere near those LPs. He would sabotage the album closet with a hair. He'd pluck a hair and lick it and put it across the cabinet. And if the cabinet door opened, then the hair would be moved, and he'd come back and bust me because, of course, when he wasn't around, I was listening to all this great music. But I think I learned more about music from my brother George. And my appreciation of music, it was a direct result of my exposure at a very early age to the best that the mid to late 60s to mid 70s had to offer, until, of course, the tragic disco accident, where I think he discovered girls and disco, and that's where the girls were, and suddenly...
Oh, he fell into that too, with the pointy shoes and all that?
He did. And but by then, I had flown the coop, and I was flying solo, and I pursued my own musical interests. I think I acquired his taste in music. Mm-hmm. And then in junior high school... one of my closest buddies was grew up to be a very successful and and high profile bass player, writer for Bass Player magazine, a couple of best-selling books, and his name's Ed Friedland. He's currently touring with the Mavericks in the U.S. and like touring like most of the year. Every year they're on the road. Great bass player, but because of him and his acceptance into a school in Manhattan called Music and Art High School. I was raised in Manhattan, by the way. You know, I grew up in Manhattan from the age of 2 until I came here. I was raised in New York City. Everything that I learned, my formative years, both in and out of the business, all of my education, everything was in New York City. So he got into Music and Art High School, and that became this circle of friends and musicians that, of course, you know, bunch of musicians, all friends, they're going to jam. And then from jamming, there's going to be a band. And then from that, there's going to be gigs. And I was always on the periphery of that. And originally, I used to jam with these guys on harmonica because I've been playing harmonica. Also, my brother George is a great harp player, and I kind of picked that up from him. And I started playing
a harp player,
harmonica. Yeah,
a harmonica. Okay, I heard harp. I was really, I know somebody that plays harp. I can't believe it. But okay, false alarm.
So I was able to kind of participate musically with all these great musicians, but that led to finding myself through circumstance in a situation where, okay, now these guys are playing and there's a sound system and somebody has to operate the sound system. And by the age of, 14, 15, you know, I was involved with that. But the real turning point came in 1974 at Madison Square Garden. For the Led Zeppelin Houses of the Holy, you know, their song, the movie, The Song Remains the Same. Remember that? I was there for that show.
Wow.
And it was one of my first rock shows. And I remember I knew enough to know that, well, you want to be between the speakers. You know, you want to catch the show. You know, you don't want to be off to the side. You want to be center. And so, you know, I was given the mandate to, you know, get the center seat. And of course, so I ended up with seats for me and my buddies that were dead center.
Wow.
Unfortunately, it was the top section at the back of the arena in literally the last row of the last section, but I was center. And I remember, because there was no one behind me, we were all sitting on the seat back with our backs to the wall watching the show. And I had these little opera glasses. And I remember watching Bonham bashing on the drums, and that was my first lesson and demonstration of latency, where, you know, the speed of sound versus the speed of light.
Yeah.
And so you'd see him bash the drums, and then like about 3/4 of a second later, you'd get the sound. And prior to, now, of course, when we entered, you know, we tried to scam our way onto the floor, which, you know, we got busted immediately and kicked out. But while I was on the floor, the first thing I noticed because we managed to get onto the floor before getting kicked out, and right in front of the entrance was this scaffold. And on the top of the scaffold was this big console. And this guy was sitting up in front of this desk in an office chair, and his feet were up on the desk, and he was drinking a beer. And I looked at this guy on the scaffold, and I was so blown away, because it was like, that's got to be the coolest job on the planet. That is, man, this guy has, not only is it the coolest job, he's got the best seat in the house. I have never seen, and to this date, I've never seen a scaffold on the floor of an arena that's like 15, 20 feet high.
No.
It's always on the floor.
You never see that.
Yeah, and I think it's because they probably discovered that that's a horrible, horrible idea. You know, but at the time, I guess it was, systems were less sophisticated. You didn't have
just
time.
had to be out of the way. That's it.
Yeah. And I guess you wanted to be like, you know, up in the air where all the sound was like wild and free.
Yeah.
But, you know, I remember looking at this guy in awe, and then security caught us, and we were sent into the nosebleeds, and I was so disappointed. But, you know, those are the tickets I bought. I think they were like $5 or $4.99 or something back then.
That was big money back then.
I know.
Yeah.
I think the big dollar, like on the floor, there were $7.50. So $7.50, just to be clear, because today, you can go $750 to a scalper to get on the floor.
Because back then you could get a pack of cigarettes for 50 cents, I think. Or
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. But the other takeaway from that seat in the back was that I noticed immediately and was heartbroken over that was the fact that it was such a plane crash. It was the worst sound I had ever imagined. It was absolutely, but mostly because I was a mile away from the stage.
Yeah.
And it's Madison Square Garden. It's very live. And it was a total plane crash. And I remember thinking to myself, holy shit, I could do a better job than that. I mean, like if I were mixing, I would never have sound like this. I could do a much better job than that. And that's what planted the seed. That in conjunction with, working with my friend Ed and his musician friends and all of that came together. And that's what set the direction. And I went to my mother and told her, I think I was at 15 years old. I said, well, I know what I want to do. And my mother being very supportive and the saint that she was, she was all ears and completely open to, wanting, okay, you found something. Okay, what is it? And I told her, and it turned out that summer there was a course, and it was a brand new course. It was the first year that it was offered. NYU had there was kind of an offshoot of NYU called before the Recording Institute of America, the Institute of Audio Research. That's what it was.
What is NYU?
New York University.
Okay.
Yeah, down in Greenwich Village.
Okay.
And so NYU was to open a kind of a I don't know what to call it, an annex or an affiliated school that was dedicated to the recording arts, and it was called the Institute of Audio Research. And but before the Institute of Audio Research, the precursor to that was a program that was a summer course that was offered. It was very small, limited number of students. I think there were maybe 12 of us in total, and it was called Recording Institute of America. And I told her about the course, and she found the money and enrolled me, and I spent that summer at a studio that was right next door, literally, to Studio 54, right on 54th Street. If you stood in front of Studio 54, the first door on the left is a glass door with stairs that went down. That was Audio Studios. And Audio Studios went on to become Soundworks. The owner of Audio, and this was like a high-tech, this was like a cutting-edge, world-class studio. And the owner passed away shortly after, and it was sold by his wife, and it became Soundworks, and that's where Donald Fagen did Nightfly. So this was like a really, and that was one of the first digital albums, Nightfly. That one was all digital. That was one of the early DDD albums recorded digitally, mixed
what year
digitally.
was that in?
Nightfly, I think, was 1987 or 1986. But I took this course in the 70s.
Oh.
Okay, so it was still Audio Studios, and the engineer that was teaching the course was an engineer by the name of Jeff Adder. And as luck would have it, after all our classes, he was working on a project there. I don't know if he was the resident engineer or whether he was just brought in, but as luck would have it, Eric Carmen was in the studio doing that iconic hit that Celine covered, All by Myself.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was Eric Carmen originally. Celine did a cover of that.
Yeah.
But Eric Carmen was in the process of doing that album. He was formerly from the group Bread. I don't know if you remember.
I heard.
You're
yeah.
old enough.
I heard. I heard of Bread.
This is really going back. This is really going back. But I remember I was so into this course, and it was such a game changer. And that's where I learned all the fundamentals. Now, it was mostly in regard to studio recording, more than live, but the fundamentals in audio are the same. You know, the electronics, acoustics, sound, microphones, how they work, selection, placement, all that. So I learned that from Jeff Adder at this course, and a couple of courses into the program, I was offered the opportunity to stick around and be a fly on the wall and run cables. And
Wow.
And so I ran the cables and was responsible. That's right. I was the guy that got the coffee for all by myself.
That's a golden
I
opportunity.
think they gave me a credit on the record. Coffee, Richard Forte. But that was really exciting. And who knew, that how big that record was going to be. I take absolutely no credit except for the coffee.
Well, a lot of guys started out that way.
Well, you know what?
Yeah.
It was inspiring. It was inspiring because this guy was real, a major talent. And Jeff Adder, I think he actually may literally have been the author, wrote the book Modern Recording Techniques. I think there's a Modern Recording Techniques Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. It's a very famous handbook for the fundamentals, and I guess through the different volumes, I guess they probably went on to more advanced techniques. I never went beyond Volume 1 because Volume 1 was what was used as a textbook at that course. Okay. So that's really the beginning, but this was really all just for kicks because I was in high school, and it's very possibly nothing was ever going to come of this except for the opportunity to practice what I learned with my buddy Ed and his friends. That led to some, oh my God, that ultimately led to my first trip in an ambulance.
Okay, tell me about that.
So as time went on and his bands progressed and his circle of friends became more proficient, and of course to get into this school you had to be really proficient in your instrument. Music and Art High School was it had a pretty high standard, like Juilliard School of Music. Ed eventually when he graduated there, he went to Berklee School of Music and got his master's and wrote a couple of books and so his friends were all really good musicians. So somewhere along the line, they managed to get a gig for the city of New York, going around and playing block parties. They gave us the truck, they gave us the permit, the barricades. We'd close down the streets, and we would be the city, the entertainment provided by the city. Okay. Back then when cities had money for stuff like this. Yeah. And we spent our summer going, in our big panel truck from neighborhood to neighborhood, and we'd set up and the roadblocks would go up and we had all the permits. The cops were generally on hand to, assist. And there were stages in some cases. Other times we'd set up right on the street, but we did one show in Ridgewood, Queens, which kind of bordered on Brooklyn, and it was a very gray day, drizzle on and off. We had no stage. We tapped our power, and I don't know who provided. I think maybe I have to imagine that the city was the one that actually did the hookup. Yeah. They would hook up into a street lamp. They'd pull the cover off the street lamp and do some MacGyver hookup and then run a distro and then everything would connect to that. And on this particular day, Ed, who was actually a guitar player at the time, was setting up and tuning his instruments and checking his pedals, and one of his pedals, I think it was a little MXR or MXR phase pedals or distortion pedals. Yeah, you remember the little square stop pedals?
Yeah. I remember those.
Well, he had dropped to one knee and he was tuning up his guitar, and his pedals were laid out in front of him, and he was checking the sound and he was activating them with his hand. while holding the guitar.
Oh.
You know, had his left hand's on the
Yeah.
neck of the guitar and his right hand's punching pedals. And he got to this one pedal that was on a manhole cover.
Oh.
And
Grounded.
man, let me tell you, I think he grounded his whole rig through the New York sewer system, powered by a street lamp. And I remember him getting blown back. He laid him out. His watch on his right hand was destroyed from the current, and it was a real eye opener. So towards the end of but you know, we're all young and stupid, so you know the show goes on, and but by the end of the show, it started drizzling a little bit, and the crowd was very appreciative, great crowd, but there were a couple of there was a certain element in the crowd that had been drinking a little too much and wasn't really ready to go home yet, and they were shouting for an encore and kind of insisting on an encore. And back then the encore was like whipping post. So, you know, you got a bunch of drunk guys in the house saying, whipping post. And before you know it, these guys, because we're busy packing up because we already got electrocuted once.
Yeah.
We don't have any cover. Our stuff's out and we're going to get this bagged, you know, as fast as possible. So next thing you know, I turn around and my drummer, Don, is having a beef with some guy from the audience that decided to come up, take his drumsticks, and start beating on the drums, shouting whipping post. And Don's vintage sonar kit was getting wet, and things were getting hot. And I thought that I would step in and help kind of mediate and, you know, as the voice of reason, to explain that, hey, you know, when, you know, nobody has to, you know, we don't want to get in any beef here, but, you know, my guy got electrocuted and we really got to wrap it up. So I came up behind the guy on the drums, and I think I put my hand on his shoulder to get his attention so I could, you know, kind of make my case. And the minute I touched this guy, suddenly there's like voices behind me saying, he hit Brock. He hit Brock. And I'm like, what's a Brock? I never even heard that name before. It turns out the guy behind the drums was Brock. And he was like the leader.
Okay.
And these guys were a gang. And so the next thing I know, somebody's got their hand on my shoulder. They spin me around and I get one straight to the face, and I go into stun mode. And then, you know, one thing leads to another, and I'm the guy that laid hands on the chief. And so next thing I know, there's this melee going on, and I got 5 guys on me, and I'm on the ground, and they're putting a stomp into me, really like serious stomping. And that eventually led to my first ride in an ambulance. So, you know, it's like adventures in rock and roll, you know.
By the way, we just got a call from the guy who mixed the show in 74. He wants to talk to the guy who thinks he can do better than him.
Yeah. Boy, given the industry back then, I'd be really impressed if he was still around. That would be really encouraging. The industry's changed a lot since, you know, just the whole.
If he's still around, he probably doesn't remember anything.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet.
Well, we'll find out if I get an email after broadcasting this.
Yeah. But, you know, hey, disclaimer, I was in the worst seat in the house, all the way at the back. There was no salvaging that seat. I mean, for all I know, on the ice, it may have sounded like $1 million.
Yeah.
But I doubt it, given the fact that in that era, the band was, you know, all the bands in that era, you know, the top bands, they were all pretty twisted most of the time.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I never saw the movie. I never even saw the movie.
I haven't seen it either.
Yeah, I should, you know, I'll get around. I got to make a point of watching that just to reminisce.
That'd be cool. Yeah, I think I'll do that too.
So all of this was pretty much as a hobbyist. I mean, this is all for the glory. Back then, there was no money.
You were still in New York, right? So when did that move happen from New York to Montreal?
Well, after high school, actually, by the time I graduated high school, I had a pretty fair amount of experience, and I took a job. I shared a cab, buddy of mine, the drummer, in fact, the guy whose ass I saved, leased a medallion, a medallion from a fleet owner. And so that meant, back then you could drive for a fleet, or you could lease a medallion and pay for the medallion by the month, and you make your payment, and whatever you clear after that is yours. Mm-hmm. And so, yellow cabs in Manhattan generally work 6 days a week, 24/6. The seventh day, oil change every single week. The thing goes into because stop and go Manhattan traffic, and so he took me on as a partner. And so I drove it 12 hours from 6 to 6, and he did mornings from 6 to 6, and we kept this thing on the road, all every day, and that's how I made money, and it gave me the freedom to not work, and same for him. We could skip whenever we wanted if we had a gig or something.
Okay, yeah,
and so. One day in, I think it was 1978, I was driving my cab, and I had just started my shift, and I was at the base of the Empire State Building on 33rd, and I get flagged, and two guys get in the cab, and this is a Friday. Rush hour, evening rush hour, so it's like first fare in Manhattan. They get in the car and they tell me they're going to Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, which is, I don't know if you know your geography, but a Friday at rush hour from Midtown Manhattan to Sheepshead Bay, that's a really big fat fare, and it's going to take a minute. It'll be a while before we get out to Sheepshead Bay.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a partition in our cab. We were like, we were the brave drivers with with no partition.
Yeah.
Which made it very easy to both play music, because I had this big boom box, and I'd size up my customers in the back, and depending on, the vibe that I got, I would then go through the cassettes and find just the right mood music for the ride, roll up the windows, put on the air conditioner. But these guys they got in the car, and they were like deep into a debate, conversation, argument. Wasn't really sure when they got in, but as I made my way to Brooklyn, I could hear them going back and forth and kind of pointing the finger at each other. It's like, well, you were supposed to do it. Well, no, I can't do it because, I got this other thing. And Bob said he was going to do it, but then, he bailed. And the other guy is like, well, opening is next week. And we don't have anybody, and we're like, serious shit, and they were really tense. So then they started going over the laundry list of all the things that they got to check off, and as I listened to them, kind of minding my own business, but with an ear on the conversation and an eye on the road, it wasn't hard to pick up what they were talking about. They were talking about audio, they were talking about sound system, and they were talking about a club install, and where I picked them up from was right at the entrance of a club that was opening next week called Leviticus International on 33rd Street, which went on to become like this major showcase cabaret club. It was a black-owned club, and mostly upscale clientele and upscale talent. I mean, really upscale talent. I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But they were discussing the install at Leviticus, and that they didn't have an operator, and that the system wasn't finished yet, and that they're way behind. And I could tell they're really, really tense. And at one point, one says to the other, "Did the crest come in yet?" And of course, because for the last 5 years I've been, involved in audio strictly for the glory and the free beer, but but enough to know what a crest was, and that was an amplifier.
Yeah.
And that was my moment. I said, did the crest come in? And I don't remember what his response was, but I found an opening, and I kind of leaned over and I said, the 400 or the 800.
Oh, and there you go.
And they kind of stopped, and there was a pause of silence. And the guy in the back leans forward and he says, the 800. and so I'm still kind of driving, my eyes on the road, and I'm nodding, with approval, like I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I said, yeah, I really like those on the bass. I prefer the 800 to the 400, but on the bass, silence. And now I got both their attention. They kind of perk up their ears, and they kind of sit forward a little bit. And the rest of the ride, the Sheep's Head Bay, was really like an interview.
Wow.
It was, they were kind of picking my brain to see what do you think about this? What do you think about what do you like on the high end? And at the time, I was living with a band in a loft on 31st, which is or 32nd, the music building, what was known as the music building. Steve Gadd had a loft there. Blondie had a loft there.
Wow.
There was a bunch of studios there. A studio, a rehearsal space. SIR.
Mm-hmm.
A studio instrument rental. They're big all over the world.
Yeah.
Well, in New York, there was SIR, and the runner-up to SIR and considered the best rehearsal facility room in the city was a studio called MR. Martin Research. It was run by a gentleman named Bill Martin. He was a military. He was an officer, a pilot. He used to fly night bombers off of aircraft carriers in Vietnam. He did everything the Navy way. I learned that expression, the Navy way.
The Navy way, yeah.
Yeah. So I was living in the same building with MR, and Daily Planet Studio was in the basement. The band that I was living with, we had a loft, and the whole band, the lighting director, the entourage, it was like a hippie commune. And we had this industrial space. In that space, we had a sound stage, and the band would rehearse. They had their own sound stage here with a full PA, permanent setup, and that's where they would rehearse their show. Their LD had the lights set up, and we would do full production rehearsals, and these guys were gigging in the city. It was a prog rock band, very Genesis influence. So I had spent a lot of time, that was like my laboratory. And so I learned so much there that when it came time to the interview with these guys in my cab, the last year of living with the band was called Amber Waves, of working with these guys, gigging and rehearsing and polishing and refining everything that I knew. That was my test lab. So by the time we got to Sheep's Head Bay, Brooklyn, I had landed the interview.
Wow.
I nailed the interview, and they invited me to the club the next day to eyeball it and to see what I would do with it, and that was the last month I drove a cab.
Wow,
that was it.
Okay,
that was it. And
it's a life changer.
That was a life-changing ride.
Wow,
that led that one gig. They were called the Equipment Sound Services. That one gig led to the working for them at Leviticus, and then getting hired away from them by Leviticus. And Leviticus used to rent additional supplemental gear to cover the riders of the bands that were performing there from MR Studio. And so, through I took care of the production for the club, and so I got to meet Bill Martin and MR, and given the fact that MR was on the 11th floor and I was living on the 5th floor, well, then they offered me a job. And so I started working at MR Studio, and through them and the connection from them to Daily Planet, which was a studio in the basement, that was my first recording studio gig. And so all of these things tied together and stemmed from this one cab ride where where you never know who's in your cab, and it helps to be chatty,
Damn right.
Yeah, I think the whole connection from the band in their rehearsal / living loft to the cab and Leviticus, and then to MR and Daily Planet, but Leviticus was really that was my showcase room. That was a space that gave me profile, because it was an in-house position. You had major acts coming in all the time. Stevie Wonder came in there unannounced. Wow. Unannounced to everyone, including me, but management knew, and they didn't want any leaks. And I remember my instructions, for the keyboard and the monitor, and the microphone. Very simple, just keyboard, no band, but no idea. Yeah, we're gonna have someone come up and play, and it ended up being Stevie Wonder. The band that brought me to Canada, my entry point, and what brought me here was a band that I don't know if maybe you're old enough. It was a band called Kinky Fox.
Kinky Fox.
Kinky
no,
Fox.
I've never heard of them.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, in the early 80s, there was a club on Park Avenue called Checkers.
Okay, yeah.
You remember Checkers?
I heard of that, yeah.
Yeah.
I've never been, but I heard.
Yeah, it was, it's kind of a legendary spot now, owned by a guy named Peter Lambario.
Is it still around?
No.
Okay.
There was a fire. Below Checkers, there was a restaurant. Dusty's was the restaurant just underneath Checkers. And Peter owned Checkers, and he went on to buy Dusty's. But there was a period there in the 80s where Checkers was the spot. That was in the early 80s, Montreal. Great thing about Montreal in the early 80s was that the live music scene was really, was really happening. There were lots of venues, and there was a big circuit, and the booking agents could take a band and create an itinerary for a good band that would literally go for months. And when I was working at Leviticus, I remember when the Tramps performed there. Oh, yeah. And back in, the Disco Inferno days, that was their big hit. And that's the one that was, that was their biggest hit. I can't tell you anything else the Tramps did, but Disco Inferno was the big one. And there was a support act on the bill that was going to be opening up for them. A local act, bunch of guys from Harlem, big 7-piece band.
Wow. Okay.
But I never heard of them. A band called Kinky Fox, and at the time, Johnny Kemp was their lead singer. Johnny Kemp. I don't know if you remember that song, "Just Got Paid Friday."
Yeah.
That's Johnny Kemp.
Okay.
So he was the lead singer, and Timmy Allen was on bass, and Timmy Allen went on to produce a bunch of hits for. And to play, he was like a very in-demand session and touring bass player that was responsible in part for a lot of the gigs that I went on to do later on, because I established a really great relationship with him while he was in Kinky Fox. But we used to play at, we were kind of like the house band at this club on the Upper West Side called The Cellar on 95th and I think it was 95th in Columbus. And we played there a lot, like, at least 2 weekends a month, and we'd alternate with another band. There'd be like Kinky Fox for 2 weeks, and then another band would come, and then Kinky Fox, and then another band. But Kinky Fox was on a heavy rotation there. And one day an agent came in from, I don't know if this agent was a Quebecer, or whether it was an agent from New York that was working with another agent in Montreal. But they offered us an opportunity to go to Montreal for a 3-week engagement at a club called Checkers.
Okay.
We'd never been to Montreal, and of course, playing The Cellar every other week, as much fun as that was, because that was another very high profile clientele, very, like money, a lot of celebrities would in and out of there all the time, like Leviticus.
Okay.
It's like just smaller. And so we took the opportunity and we came up here for what was supposed to be 3 weeks. I think in 81 was the first time, that was our first trip here. And it turned into like, Gilligan's Island cruise, the 3-hour cruise. That we
You got marooned.
We set up shop and after the first, and back then bands would play 6 days a week,
Wow.
if you were in and there weren't a lot of bands that could still generate excitement and interest after playing every night for a week.
Yeah.
Usually it's like, 1 week next, and then you go to another club and you play for a week. But this was a 3-week engagement. And at the time, this club was doing that format for, I think, a number of years. And they were doing mostly dance bands and alternative rock, kind of, new wave, not funk, R&B, soul. And Kinky Fox was a serious R&B funk band. But what set
my
them...
kind of band.
Oh, man, that's my first love. Listen, this is, that was the format at Leviticus. That's most of what I did at Leviticus. But when Kinky Fox showed up to open for the Tramps, I'd never heard of them. They certainly didn't know me. They were terrified of going up in flames, because this, I think, was probably their most high-profile date in the city so far.
Yeah, and you don't know who the sound guy is.
You don't know who the sound guy, and
lots
of
stress.
Exactly, and so, I was viewed with a degree of suspicion that, man, you sure you know how to do this? You sure you're up to this? And I was game, and they went on to tear the place down. I felt so bad for the Tramps, and I wasn't mixing the Tramps, because the Tramps were, they were a high profile act. They had their own FOH guy, they were an international act. And so I was just there to, as the A1 to look after the system, to make sure that that the headliner's FOH guy had a good night and that everything worked right, and mix the support act, because, the headliner's engineer isn't going to mix the support act. That just doesn't happen. And so, but that was my room, though. See, I had the home field advantage because I had been in that room now for about a year.
Yeah.
So
you knew
that was I absolutely knew every day. I tuned the system, I installed the system, I operated the system, and it turns out that Fox was just the best band I had ever mixed.
Wow.
These guys were so incredible. By the end of their set, Johnny Kemp was leading the audience around the room in one of those conga lines, and the band was originally from the Bahamas. Like the founders of the band, Johnny was from the Bahamas, so was a percussionist and the original drummer, and they came up from the Bahamas, so they really had that island vibe, and he was the audience that was all like upscale and ties. They were in a conga line behind Johnny, and the house was, they were literally burning down the house. And then the Tramps came on.
Oh.
And it was crickets. And
oh, God.
They couldn't follow this band. It was, as good as they were, Kinky Fox stole the show. And so this, based on the success of that show, of course, the band hired me immediately and like, you're our sound guy. And
I've seen that many times on tour.
Yeah.
We don't have a sound guy. Can you do it? Yeah, sure. And after the first night, it's like, okay, you're staying with us. I've seen that many times.
Yeah. Well,
I have some good friends actually that I met that way.
Traditionally, most FOH sound guys, you come up through a different path. You usually, land a job as a cable jockey, running cables, and you work your way up, and it's usually takes a good long while before anybody's going to put you behind a desk, if ever.
Yeah.
You may never get behind the desk, but what you do learn is every single aspect of the sound company job. So you can go out and work for any sound company, and you've rigged speakers and run cables and done everything. Unfortunately, I never benefited from that. So there's a lot of that like routine sound company stuff that I never really became proficient in because I never had that position.
Yeah.
I kind of leapfrogged all of that by, being a club, in-house club guy at a good club, mixing really good bands, and then getting drafted by the band. And so I'm very, very fortunate. And this is probably the best luck I had, that one cab fare, and the fact that that landed me in the right club to make all these other connections. So that's how I started working with Kinky Fox. And so one day this agent discovers the band playing at the Cellar and offers us a gig in Montreal. And the other unique thing about Kinky Fox is that we didn't know what the established norms and standards were here in Montreal. In New York, you had to roll big. It's if you didn't have like a big sound system, you just weren't. And by big, like the criteria is, if I set this birthday cake 1 meter in front of the bass bin and hit the kick drum, can I blow out the candles? If you can blow out the candles, you got enough bass.
Yeah.
And so, we came up here with everything we had because they own their own system, and it was a 3-way system, but this was like the first big gig, and we were kind of tense about, maybe we don't have enough, not knowing that the standard at the time here, where bands were rolling in with really tiny little rudimentary systems that were mostly, capable of providing like intelligible vocal at best, with maybe a little of this and that thrown in, and the rest was a roar of stage noise.
That makes me laugh. A band coming out of New York asking, well, are we big enough? Coming to Montreal. I mean, normally it's the opposite. It's people from Montreal going to New York that shit their pants.
Yeah, this was and rightly so, because in New York, you can't half step. You better have your shit together, and you get one shot. If you don't wow them coming out of the gate, you're probably not going to win them over during the night.
Of course.
And so, first order of business, we get to the club, and we determine that, we need a little more. And so, I don't remember how we met this person, but there was somebody, I think it was affiliated with the club, that put us on to this guy on St. Antoine that had a little shop just like a block away from Steve's Music. And it was nothing more than a storefront with a big glass window, completely bare on the inside except for a desk all the way at the far wall. This one guy, I think he had a helper, but I don't remember who the helper was at that time. And it was just him and this desk and a bunch of like Martin gear and an assortment of speakers and amplifiers.
Was that Jack's Music
It
store?
was a hot spot. No, it was a guy named Steve Coster.
Oh, okay.
and he's one of the first people that we met as a band, and that I met personally in Montreal because he had what we needed and at a price that we could afford. And frankly, we were more interested in making a good impression than making money, because it's like Montreal, man. It's like international, And so
I have to mention Steve Coster is my boss. Okay, he owns AVL Media Group, the office we're sitting in right now. It's just so people know who we're talking about here.
From very humble beginnings.
Yes,
very
so I see.
Humble beginnings. That was you didn't know him back then.
No, I didn't.
No. And who knew that he was going to grow into this giant, which he has, and I owe him a lot, and we'll get to that. Wow, what a canoe trip I'm taking on, man. This is like, wow, I haven't strolled down memory lane like this in maybe forever. But you can edit out all this stuff, cut the fat.
I always say I'm going to edit, and I never do. The only thing that really bothers me about this recording is my crappy mic, but that's okay.
No,
I'll live with
it sounds good in my cans anyway.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. It sounds good. So there we are at Steve at CoStar, and we get all this extra gear and bring it to the club, and we set up, and I tune it up, and and agonize over the tuning, and our system back then was very rudimentary, but I swear to God, we could blow out a birthday cake at 1 meter. We really could. And when we opened that week, the response from the club owner, from the audience, from the booking agent, down the line, they were just floored by this band from New York. We did get some blowback though, and it was from all the other bands on the circuit, and they were there nightly, religiously. Everybody, by the third week, a good portion of the audience were all the other bands on the circuit coming down to see what all the hubbub was about. And they loved the show. They were blown away, and they were pissed as shit at us because we had now forever fouled the circuit with the production standard, because these guys weren't rolling with that. They were doing it with much, much less, and the booking agent, in response to the success of this first engagement, immediately followed up with, well, hey, how about after this? I have another gig for you here. And they put together an itinerary, and the itinerary went for almost a year. So our little three-hour cruise, turned into like a year. And of course, because we're on work permits, we had to exit every couple of weeks. We literally had to go down to the border, exit the border, make a U-turn, come back, get stamped with extensions, because
that quick.
Yeah. You just had to physically, you had to put both feet in the U.S. and then turn around, and then the Canadian side would stamp you as entering on this date, because I think the permits were good for like a month.
Okay.
But that the band hit like gangbusters. I mean, it was and that's how I got here. And so, of course, 1 year turned into, I went back and forth. I was still touring with with the connections that I made while I was at Leviticus, doing international acts. I did a world tour. I think the first was in 83, and then again in 85, and with bigger acts. But it all stemmed. Everything, you talk about it like a couple of degrees of separation. Everything was, no more than, 3 or 5 degrees of separation from that cab ride. They're all directly linked. But it was my exposure with Kinky Fox here, I think, that because we're all an unknown quantity here. Everybody, me, the band, nobody knew us from anyone else. But we established a tremendous reputation, and that went a long way to increasing my profile here. And everything that's ever happened for me here is in direct link to Kinky Fox. It all started from Kinky Fox.
And what happened with that band?
Well, Timmy, Johnny Kemp, the singer, went back to, because a couple of them had a little higher aspirations. Their ambition was to hit on a different level, but for a lot of the guys, it was just about making the rent. And there was so much work. I mean, they went to the top of the scale really fast, and the demand for the band was really, really high. And so our circuit went from Toronto to Halifax. So we worked steady, and I was with them. I ultimately left the band in, I think it was 1986, because to pursue other things. I couldn't do, you can only be at one place at one time.
Yeah. What I find strange, though, is that they come up to Montreal, they're liked, they're booked. I understand that. But having that notoriety? Notoriety? Anyway, having...
There was a certain amount of there was some notorious stuff too. There are.
But what I'm wondering is that okay, so they were doing this in Canada.
Yeah.
But I mean, couldn't they go back to the States and get
the circuit
bigger?
here? The circuit here in the early '80s was so good. There wasn't that much work in New York.
Really,
and
elsewhere in the States, no,
not without a record. And these guys were a cover band, but what really set them apart, and the reason I attribute their success in large part to the fact that they weren't going off a top 40 radio playlist. These guys were, they're a New York funk band, and so their repertoire was incredibly diverse and was not linked to the top 40. We were doing stuff like Billy Cobham, Glass Menagerie, funk fusion, like really heavy.
Which gives you a certain performance freedom.
Exactly. And B-sides of records that nobody heard. They were playing tunes that people assumed was original material.
Uh-huh.
We never claimed that it was original in New York, because, New York radio was playing this stuff. But at the time, and now, up till now, there is no R&B black radio in Montreal.
No,
there
true.
is no.
Yeah.
It's Montreal radio. There's nothing. There's no station that's that hip here, at least on the R&B side, where R&B is big all over the world. Mm-hmm. When I came here, I think most people didn't know who Luther Vandross was. Really, and Luther Vandross, he was a giant. But they just, if it's not on the radio, you're not gonna know it. So a lot of the music they were playing were like these really great tracks off of records that nobody heard, and combined and performed in a way mixed with familiar songs that people knew. That was their formula. That was the secret to their success. And I still believe to this day that it's not so much what you play as much as how you play it.
Mm-hmm.
Just good music is good music, and if you perform it really well, there's a universal appeal whether you recognize it or not.
Comedy's like that too. I once I did a lot of touring with newbies, comedians, and stand-up comics. And one time there was this girl that was doing this act, and the act was just not working. People were not reacting, and everybody thought that the number was bad. And one time she left her text at FOH, and I started reading it just for fun, And I knew the number, I knew the act, but I started reading the text without the performance.
Yeah.
And I cracked up, and I said, man, I'd give this to the proper comedian. The text is good. Right.
Yeah.
I told the girl, maybe you should be writing,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
But performance is, it makes a hell of a difference.
Yeah. And it was great that in spite of the fact that this was a 7-piece band using wedges on stage and playing clubs and with backline amplifiers, they were always really super sound conscious. They cared how they sounded. Mm-hmm. They wanted to sound. They were into taking no prisoners, and they were super cooperative. And whatever I needed, it was always, Rich, what do you need? What do you need? Am I too loud? You want me to turn my amp sideways? Is this working for you? And it was, that was such a great experience. I was with them for about 6 years. 79 to 85, 86. Yeah, that's a long time. So, I was living and working and traveling with these guys, except for the periods where I was touring with other acts. I had to go on, hiatus, which I think kind of undermined the relationship a little bit and maybe ultimately contributed to, my departure, because of course, they would have liked me to give priority and, to stay with them. And, but like the guys that left the band to pursue other things and to become much more successful because they took the chance
Yeah.
I had to do the same.
Yeah, and how did your permanent stay in Canada happen? I mean, you were going in and out of the States at the time, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what? By the time 1987 rolled around, I had met my future wife, and let me tell you, when you have an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, it's hard to give up. I always kept one foot in New York, even though I was madly in love with and in Montreal, and I love the city. And Montreal has always reminded me, when I think of Montreal to me, the way that I describe Montreal to people that have never been here, but that have been to Europe, I describe it as the closest sister city to Montreal is Munich. You ever been to Munich?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Munich is as distinct. Being Bavarians, they're the citizens, of Munich. They're Bavaria. That's Bavaria. It's in Bavaria. They're Bavarians, and there's a distinct difference between Bavarians and Germans, and they're a lot closer to Italians, both geographically and in terms of spirit. They drink harder, they laugh louder, they're rowdier, they're more festive. They're a very festive bunch, and the city, but it's of course very European because it's in Europe, and they have that sensibility. And when I came here, I noticed it immediately. From my interactions with the people here.
Yeah, from a New York point of view. Because I was born here, so I'm kind of used to this. But you're telling me
just
this,
normal.
And you're describing Montreal very well.
Oh, absolutely. No, this is a distinct
society. But for me, it's normal.
Oh, I know, absolutely, and that's great. And but the point is that there's Canada, right, and then Quebec. And all Quebecers are Canadians, but the Bavarians, they're all German too.
Yeah.
But they're Bavarian, and there's a distinct difference between a Bavarian and someone from like Frankfurt.
Oh yeah. The more I travel through Canada, the more I notice that there is a difference.
No, it's more festive.
Not that
here.
It's any better; it's just different.
Well, it's they're more liberal. Quebecers are more liberal, more festive generally, a little bit less preoccupied and hung up and sweating the small stuff. They don't sweat the small stuff like your neighbors to the south. And to the west, but the contrast, gigging in, I love you, Ontario, but
please don't fire me.
but it's a different pace. It's a different rhythm. It's a very, very different rhythm. I love it here. So and you can't overlook the similarities between Montreal and New York. Even geographically, okay, starting at Lower Manhattan at the pier, okay, you got the financial district, and then you got you have Chinatown, and here in Montreal you got the old port, and then the financial district, and then Chinatown, and if you take a minute to think about it, there are so many parallels like that where this city is divided up into districts. In the same way that Manhattan's divided up into districts. And so that similarity, but with the European sensibility, mindset, liberal attitude, it's just, how can you not fall in love with the city? Really. So by the time 1987 rolled around, it was something had to give. I was either going to go back to New York, but no, I was in love and living here, and so I sold my the rights, the insider rights to my apartment on the Upper West Side, which back then you could get paid a whole whack of money just to move. Just like you want to vacate, here's 20 grand, just to move. So that was like seed money, and so I put that towards a sound system, and then I brought that money to a guy named Steve Kostar. Again, Steve. You know what, Steve? I'm realizing now that Steve played a big part in my in my life up here. There's more, but I bought my first sound system from him, and
so if you gave him all your money, I guess that's how he became big, right?
Yeah, that's it. He owes it all. Yeah, it was those big sales to me. And he set me up with my first sound system, and I was able to put that to work, like as the sound system, as the touring system for these club bands, and then ultimately that system became the in-house system at Checkers, rather than having, because after Kinky Fox set a standard in that club, the owner he realized the wisdom of maintaining the standard and kind of leveling the playing field for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so after I left Kinky Fox, I lived literally like a block away from Checkers. When I wasn't touring on my time off, I needed a job. Mm. And so I offered Peter my sound system and my services to act as house engineer for all the bands coming in. So that, and I put together a really good system. It was an old turbo sound kit with supplemental subs, also capable of moving a lot of air, and a better console, and a better system than what although not as powerful as that original Kinky Fox system, but definitely more than enough for the club. And I became the house engineer there for a couple of years, and my system was working year round. And so that kit that I got from Steve, I put that to work, and that I had that kit all the way until I went through 3 different clubs since Checkers, and in the last club. This was in the early 90s, and I'm not going to mention any names here because it's kind of a shady story, but this was during the biker wars. Remember in the 90s when clubs and bars were getting blown up left and right, and firebombed because of the rivalry and stuff. Well, my sound system was in one of those clubs, and prior to anything happening to the club, I approached the owners and I said, well, listen, I'll put my system, I'll run your production in your club and provide the sound system, conditional upon you taking a rider on your insurance policy, payable to me. I will pay the premium. And so it's not going to cost you a dime, but as a rider to your existing contract, it'll be a lot cheaper for me, and it'll be more affordable to you because that would be reflected in my rate. And so they agreed. And sure enough,
Bang.
fate hit, and I ended up losing my entire production.
Wow.
But I was insured, and this was all analog gear. It was all old, analog stuff. And so the insurance company, God bless them, and this is why I love insurance companies so much. They'll pay out after you've replaced all your gear and produce all the receipts for what you've replaced up to the replacement value of your policy. It's like they won't give you the money to go out and replace your gear. You got to replace your gear, and then they'll reimburse you. And I had to jump through so many hoops to fulfill all the requirements for the insurance company to pay out. And I couldn't. Without help. So I went to my friend Steve, and I explained the situation, and he actually took the time to go with me to a notary and sign an affidavit, and that he attested to everything that was lost because I got it from him, because I didn't maintain the paperwork, and he made it possible for me to get paid.
Wow.
So. Yeah, but Steve factors into this a lot. It's amazing, huh? That's your boss. So with his help, I replaced my lost gear, but I never got back into the big pieces, speakers and amplifiers. I took the payout and I focused on just the tools of my trade, mixing. Just basically,
Yeah.
I wanted to put together an FOH mix position.
Yeah.
And this is the basis of my service now and has been since then, since 1997.
And I know
replaced-
you're an early digital mixing
I
adopter.
was the
Does
first
that happen at that time?
in
or-
1997. That's right. When I lost all
Okay.
my gear, I realized I saw the technology that was emerging, and it was easy to see the advantages, even though my first digital mixing console wasn't really designed for live sound. It was really more of like Project Studio stuff.
Which one was that?
Boy, that was a Yamaha.
Oh,
A Yamaha O2R.
O2R. You
Yeah.
know what? I don't know much about sound, but I do know that board because I went to a studio back then that had two of them
Yeah.
sitting next to the other. And was it an O2R or an O2V or something like that?
I think it was
or 1V or
you know
anyway.
what? It was. Yeah, I think it was an O2R. I know the one. If you're talking about the studio desk, that's a different one. And I have lots of. Actually, I did a couple of records on those Yamaha studio desks.
O1V, I think it was.
Yeah, no, the O1V was a kind of a very closely related. You know what? There's a family of digital. Those were the early Yamaha digital
I can't believe I'm
boards.
talking soundboards.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, you know what? It was clear to me that if I were to transition from analog to digital, that I would be able to do a lot more, a lot faster, with a lot less gear and less truck space, and by myself, which is really important, you know. And so I transitioned into digital, and that was probably in hindsight, losing all my gear was probably one of the best things that happened, because it allowed me to transition into digital and get ahead of the curve pretty much before everyone else. When I got this board, I remember the reaction was like, "You can't do that with that. That's not what that's for. that's not a real board." And I took that board out on the road on tour with a band that was originally from Montreal, a band called C Spot Run. I don't know if you remember.
I heard
I
of them.
To
Yeah.
date, man, one of, if not my favorite Canadian pop band.
Mm-hmm.
I love those guys. In 98 or 99, they had a big hit called Weightless.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, they were signed to a record deal, and the record company was behind them, and we toured all over. We went back and forth across the country umpteen times. I can't even remember how many times we drove across the country. And it was with that tiny little 19-inch rack mount, little postage stamp, and we went on tour playing large clubs and arenas, opening up for bands like Blue Rodeo. When we toured with I Mother Earth, we did a whole tour with I Mother Earth and Wide Mouth Mason. There's another name from the past.
Yeah.
And the headliner was I Mother Earth, and they were touring at the time with this massive Midas, the big four. God, what was? Shame on me. The big mothership, the one that was at Place des Arts forever.
Yeah.
I can't remember the board, but their footprint was this massive footprint, and they had racks and racks of stuff. And at the far left end of the FOH position was this little rack with a tiny little mixer sitting on top, and that was for the support act.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I suspect it was stage noise, and combined with they weren't really concerned that much with how it sounded in the house, with all the roar coming off the stage, because they were really loud. I Mother Earth, things didn't go their way on a technical level, and they went through a couple of FOH guys, but mostly because the guy at the other end on that little rinky-dink piece of shit sounded like $1 million every night. All credit to C Spot Run. Those guys, like Kinky Fox, they were meticulous about their sound, and they cared. It was priority one was the experience of the audience and the sonics, and they were so into it. And we had such a great reputation for presentation that the manager for I Mother Earth one night came over to take a closer look at my rig because he didn't know anything about sound. And he was actually thinking maybe his band should be on this. Never in a million years would that have been possible because C-Spot Run was 4-piece, you know, and it was a little 24-channel board. So, you know, it wasn't going to happen. But he attributed the quality gap to the fact that I was on a superior setup, which of course I was not.
Mm-hmm.
But that led to him taking notes and calling Yamaha and wanting to find out, so what's up with this board? And can I use one of these? Is this going to work for me? And I think the person that he spoke with is I'll have to ask Ashley Clark about this, but I know that I got a call from, I think it was Ashley from Yamaha, because the manager had given him my number, and he said, yeah, hi, I'm from Yamaha, and I was in conversation with the manager from I Mother Earth, and apparently you're on tour and you're using one of our boards. And what are you using exactly? And I told him what I was using, and it was like, really? You're doing like arenas, and you're mixing front of house on that? Okay, we don't know how you're doing that, and how that even possible. But that started a relationship and a loyalty to Yamaha. From that day on, Yamaha has been very, very supportive and gracious and generous to see that I am, that I have one of their desks.
Well,
you know, they've been very, very supportive, and I'm on my 4th desk with them now, and I'm a real fan. I've been with them since, with their earliest digital desks that weren't even designed. I adapted them for live music, and I think they always got a kick out of that.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Actually, that's pretty much a souvenir I have of you. The first times we were gigging together, you'd show up with this dinky board.
Yeah.
And set it in front of the big setup.
That thing was 19 inches wide. It was 19 inches
Just
wide.
One little small rack, and lately I can't even find your rack. I see you walking around with an iPad. So
I tell you, it's all part of the evolution. I think it's we've gone from the days of the big analog footprints that take up a 10 by 10 riser, and then gotten it down to small digital consoles that do everything, and you don't need the racks anymore. And now and that's not enough to satisfy a lot of the promoters now and the organizers of like the kind of corporate events that I corporate sound is. I do a lot of that, and more often than not, they don't want anything out in front of house.
No, of course.
So I've been mixing wirelessly. Wow, I was a real early adopter, of wireless mixing. My last Yamaha console was never designed or intended to be used wirelessly. It had a USB port intended to connect directly via copper wire to a computer, and mostly for archiving presets and the contents, the memory of the console, to transfer the memory into the computer so you could have a backup and load it into another desk, but at the same time, through the computer, have access to all the parameters. The catch was you had to connect via USB.
Yeah.
But there's
then
a whole
they came
generation
up with wireless USB.
There's a whole generation of wireless routers, which are harder to find these days.
Yeah.
That have that emulate that wire connection. And so, but the software was never intended to be used as a mix platform for wireless remote control. Well, that was my first. I was doing shows, doing the sound check on the desk, but then mixing the actual event on a tablet, on a PC tablet, with an interface that was never supposed to work, and it was a pure MacGyver setup. And but now, of course, all the consoles are designed for wireless operation. But because I've been mixing wireless for so long, it gave me a head start, and I'm very happy that a lot of my clients rely on that. And part of the reason why I work as much as I do is because I'm not just willing to go without a mixer, where a lot of guys break into a sweat and they start itching and scratching, like they really break out in a rash at the thought of, what do you mean I can't mix on the desk?
Yeah.
You want to glass? I can't mix on glass. I've been mixing on glass for, well over a decade.
Well, I remember when the first iPhone came out.
Yeah.
I was like, no buttons? No way.
This isn't going to work.
No way.
Yeah.
And
especially
now,
if you were from a BlackBerry.
Well, yeah. And now my horror story, my personal horror story, is tactile screens in cars.
Right.
I don't understand them. I don't understand why you have to take your eyes off the road to go and set your heater or and go through the menus to bring down the intensity of the screen.
Right.
I'm driving. Come on.
Yeah.
You know? So I can understand in a live situation, mixing on this glass screen, I can understand how that can be scary.
I don't even remember how. Oh no, I do remember. Because now, one of my mixers, I have my flagship mixer, my big Yamaha, my QL5, and I have for smaller gigs, I have a turnkey front of house mix position that is totally designed. That doesn't even there's a power button and one knob for the headphone jack to adjust the volume that's coming out of the headphone jack if you have one plugged in the front. Other than that, it's basically a computer with 32 in and 16 out, and that's all there is.
Yeah.
I reviewed the first generation totally wireless mixer from Mackie. It was a 1608. For a magazine that I was writing for. I was doing reviews for Professional Sound.
Yeah, and I saw that.
I reviewed the 1608, and they sent me one, and I took it out for a test drive and just used the hell out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And really every input and every output, and really pushed the limit and got away with murder on this tiny little thing that fit in a shoulder bag.
Wow.
That you could literally put underneath the airline seat. It's, and I was so blown away, and I gave it a rave review, and Mackie said, we were so happy you liked it, and they let me keep it. And then they sent me their flagship, the next one, and they've been very, very generous and kind with me, and so now I have a 1608 and a 32, and I use that 32, and what I do with that 32 on my website. There's a clip there from MRO. I don't know if you got a chance to plug in your headphones.
No, I didn't.
That's a left right out of that DL32,
uh-huh.
and that's the one with no knobs or buttons or nothing but an iPad as an interface, but it's because I've been doing it the hard way on glass for over 10 years. That when somebody comes out with something that's designed from the ground up for wireless operation,
there you go.
It's a joy,
Yeah.
It's that much easier. So that if it wasn't for that, I don't think I probably wouldn't be working as much because and like the old days with Kinky Fox, where the other bands got really pissed off because we were rolling in so hard with all the big gear and stuff that they couldn't afford if they wanted to have any money left over at the end of the gig. There are a lot of guys that have expressed a degree of anxiety / resentment that they get into, well, Richard Forte does it like that, so you can too. That would rather not mix on wireless. It's hard for me to find subs for the gigs that require wireless.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to train my own guy. That it's a work in progress right now, and I'm happy to say he's coming along really well, and I'm kind of having fun sharing. I'm mentoring a young engineer.
Well, there you have it, a pioneer of wireless mixing, having trouble finding the next generation.
Well, yeah, because the old guys, I don't know if you remember. You remember the lighting consoles where you had the patch at the patch bay with those jumper wires.
Yeah.
I mean, would you? Is there any?
I actually made one myself.
Okay, would you ever go back? You'd
that.
Never go back to
I know
that.
I wouldn't.
You would never go back to that.
No.
Now with all the digital soft patch on your control surface,
Yep.
there's no way. When the digital boards first came out, there was a lot of opposition from the veteran analog guys that, it's a Midas. This is gonna haunt me. The something for the. I bet if you stick your head out, oh my God, you guys are Midas.
Yep.
Open up the door.
I can open the door. Showroom's right the end,
exactly.
right across the wall.
Exactly. Yeah. If it isn't, but even Midas now has gone all digital. They're you guys are making spectacular digital boards. I actually spec'd for one of my main bands an M32 because it's just such a great sounding board. That's Midas and that's all digital.
Yeah, you really got the crappy mic stand there.
Oh,
Give me
I
a
see.
second.
I see
I'll fix
there.
that for you.
I'll turn it up. I'll use gravity. There we go.
Well, yeah.
I'll do the Julio.
So okay, so that's where we are now. So you're training some guy to be able to cover you.
Yeah, and because you know what, I've been doing this a really long time. I don't know how much, how many more miles,
Well, that was my next question. How old are you?
Oh man, I've been doing this for over 35 years, and I say that because I just hit my 40th anniversary, and Forte Sound just turned 40.
Wow, wow!
But I hesitate to say 40 years because
you'll get used
to
it.
It'll make it too obvious that I'm one of the geezers in the industry. I'm like, I don't want people to start calling me pops.
Well, I have to ask your age because by looking at you, I can't tell.
Music, see, you know what the music business leads.
That's what it does.
It'll keep you young,
Yeah.
or it'll age you.
Yeah.
Faster than
that's why I keep my hair long, because if I cut it, I really look like my age. So.
Yeah, see, that's why I shave mine, because if I didn't, you'd know.
That's the other solution.
Well, between me and you, and don't tell anybody, but I'm celebrating my 60th in 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Wow. Okay. Well, congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Because you don't look it at all.
No, I'll tell you what, man.
And I won't tell anybody, but you just did.
Yeah. No, if I won the lottery tomorrow and could retire, I would still mix.
Well, yeah.
I'm
not surprised.
I don't think I've had a job since 1979. That's really how I feel. And I'm conflicted a little bit because I think that it's responsible for my arrested development, why I haven't grown up and why I'm not in touch with my physical condition as much, because in my head, I'm still I'm still as enthusiastic and I'm passionate about the soundscape, because every day, this is why I prefer live to studio, because every show has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's live. And if you weren't there to hear it, it didn't happen. Like if you don't hear that tree fall in the forest, did the tree fall?
Yeah.
It's history. It's immediately history. It doesn't live on for better or worse, whether it's the best show you ever did or the worst piece of shit plane crash you've ever had. It doesn't matter because you get to turn the page and tomorrow's another project, and that's what I enjoy the most. And every day, even though it might be the same act with the same repertoire, it's a different room, it's different acoustics, it's a different environment, and so you have to bring all those tools to bear nightly. I really it really feels more like a hobby, but I've been fortunate enough to.
Yeah, I have one of my friends who's a project manager, and he's living about the same thing you are. He was taking care of shows and productions and all that. And one time he got this compliment from the company he was working for, and the owner of the company says, "Yesterday you were a god to my client. Today you're an asshole like everybody else. Get back to work."
Yeah.
Got to start over every day.
Yeah, but it keeps your focus. It provides the adrenaline. When you're in a studio, you're kind of cloistered in this isolated environment, which may or may not have a window, and you're doing whatever project the studio booked. Whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And you're doing take after take after take. endless on the same verse. It's there are people that are better suited to that. Apparently, I'm like seriously ADD, and so I need stimulus, because if not, I'll be chasing every squirrel that goes by, and so that isn't. I'm not really as well suited for the studio as I am for live, because live, you don't have time to take your eye off the ball. There is no. It's the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
When the doors open, that's
Show
it.
must go
That's
on.
it.
That's it.
Sound check's over.
Ready or not.
Ready
go.
or not. Yeah. It's got to happen, and that I rely on that adrenaline. That's what keeps me focused, and that's what provides the excitement and the payoff. Because with all of that, when everything ends up going your way, the adrenaline, there's nothing like it. This your show is called Backstage Cowboys, and a Backstage Cowboys. Backstage. All right. I think that I should deliver at least like one backstage story. If not, there's a lot, and we haven't gotten into any backstage stories.
Well, go right ahead.
Okay. I mentioned I used to play harmonica. I actually still do.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. In 1992, Bryan Adams did his Wake Up the Nation tour that went, from the furthest Atlantic coast to the Pacific, all outdoor, big festival shows. I was mixing front of house for Sass Jordan at the time, and it was Bryan Adams, Steve Miller Band, the Archangels, and Sass Jordan. And at the time, and I imagine probably still to this day, because Steve Miller Band is like a family that's been together forever. That's a really tight-knit bunch. That's a real family. Great people. Norton Buffalo, a guy named Norton Buffalo, harmonica player. That as a harmonica player, I've heard a lot of work from Norton Buffalo, and I'm a big fan of Norton Buffalo, and I didn't know that Norton Buffalo played with Steve Miller until the tour. And when I discovered, oh man, that's Norton Buffalo on harp, holy shit! And I told the band, and they played a bunch of tracks that he played on. And it's like, this guy's awesome. And so, unbeknownst to me, they set up an introduction so I could meet this great harp player. So one day in the catering tent backstage at we were out west somewhere, and we're at catering, and the band, Sass's guitar player comes up and says, "Hey Richie, let me introduce you to somebody," and he brings me over to none other than Norton Buffalo, and so we're chatting, and it's a thrill, and then he said, "Well, you play harmonica too." And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, well, hell. And he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a harp, and then he leans into me and he gives me this big toothy grin and exposing all his teeth. And he had it was this hillbilly rotten teeth falling out, all black, and just the worst horror story you've ever seen. And he's reaching over and he's passing me a harmonica. Okay. And I'm scared to death because, oh man, I'm flat, like harp players don't share. That's like sharing a toothbrush. You don't blow another man's harp because that's like, you might as well use his toothbrush. But in addition, it's like World War I trench foot in his mouth, and I'm horrified, and I'm trying to think of a way to get out of this. And while I'm squirming and I'm in shock, a couple of other guys from the band show up, and then they say, "Oh, is this your sound guy? oh, hey, how are you? And they, extend the hand and they smile. And everybody's teeth in the band are just a horror story. and now Sass's guitar player, he can't contain himself anymore, and he busts out laughing because I don't know what I look like, but I was in shock.
You're terrified.
And now they're all laughing, and then they reach into their mouth and they pull out their very expensive Hollywood teeth. It was a gag.
Oh shit!
They punked me.
Oh God!
Yeah, and that was apparently that was the funniest thing that Nick, the guitar player, had ever seen, and they got me good. That was one of my more memorable, backstage moments. They, I'll never forget that. That's
I'm so glad you pulled that out without me asking.
Yeah. Well, it's that's a good PG one.
Yeah.
That one's good for everyone.
We've been going on for 1 hour 44 minutes.
Oh man,
You
okay,
know
this
that.
is never going to
This
make it.
is
You're
the,
going to have to do
no.
all kinds of nip and tuck on this thing.
I'm not doing anything to this. I'm going to let it run as is, and you're going to be the longest running episode ever.
Oh my God, sorry about that.
Well, you know what? I think there might be a second part to this eventually, because I feel you got a lot more stories to tell.
You know what? This has been a lot of fun. You know what? I'm flattered that you invited me down for a chat.
I'm very glad that you accepted because
I haven't
this
had
is really cool.
Yeah, I haven't shared. I haven't shared any of this except with like family and the people that really know me a long time. It's an interesting path that brought me here, and I'm grateful to so many people that had a part in it, and that it all comes down to fate. I mean, you have to, what I tell, boy, every year at one point or another, I'll do a show, and someone will come up after the show to say something nice about the production, and it'll be some young guy and saying, "Oh man, this is what I want to do." And I can relate. And I remember, in 1974, looking at that guy on the scaffold. So this kid will, mention how, this is what he wants to do, and how do I do this, and where do I go? And the industry's changed so much since, when I started. When I took that first course in 1975, Recording Institute of America, it wasn't a money-making machine. It wasn't, it was so niche. It was so small. It was, few people really gave thought to
Making a career out of it. Yeah.
Or making or offering a course for the purpose of, making money, like, commercializing the art. It's changed so much. I think I benefited the most from starting in the analog era, where it was really about doing the most with the least, where it was all like as rudimentary as it could. Like if you got an analog console with a graphic equalizer for the house, 2 channels of compression, and 1 reverb unit and 1 delay unit, that was like, that you were lucky.
You had a complete kit there.
That was complete. Everything above and beyond that, with all the plug-in, gates and compressors and all that, anything above that was optional. It wasn't mandatory.
And never in the budget.
No, exactly. You had to make do, and so you had to hone your technique and know how to learn how to maximize. Now we're in the age of low-cost digital consoles where everything is integrated, and if you were to translate all of the resources available in the desk to a physical rack, assuming that each rack space was 2 channels of processing, you would have 4 racks, 6 foot and change, and even that you might have to go to quad processors per space to equal the processing power of today's digital console. And as a consequence, the guys coming up today have too much available. And they rationalize that, well, if every channel's got a compressor, a gate, and a plugin available, or 2 plugins available, it's because you're supposed to use it. And the fundamentals, they're overlooked. They're completely overlooked in favor of the quick fix in the form of a plugin. And I find that that the art has suffered a lot with all the advancements that I take advantage of, and I'll never go back to the analog, but I still believe that less is more.
Yep.
And so I think it's harder in a lot of ways because of that. It's made it a bit harder for different reasons. But these kids come up and they want to do what I do, and what they really mean is they want to get behind the desk and push buttons.
Yep.
And they don't want to they don't want to learn the basics and kind of come up through the ranks. They want to go straight to the glory. And so my response is generally, I'll ask the question, oh, so yeah, I see. So you want to see the world and make a lot of money and, live the life. Huh? And I say, well, you know what? Buy lots of lottery tickets because the chances of you buying and hitting on the big one are probably greater than you being able to make a career out of this.
Wow.
Because it's luck. There's just so much. That's the wild card. I was driving a cab. Okay, I was already doing it, and I had put in the time, and I learned the fundamentals.
Yeah. And
I was
you
committed.
You could have minded your own business in that cab and never talked to the guy also.
Exactly.
I mean, you did. Sometimes, I'm not a luck believer, really. I think that there's opportunities for everybody, and I think that some people recognize and take advantage of opportunities, and others pass by.
I like to, at this point, I like to share everything I know. It's if I have a willing candidate that's got the right attitude.
Yeah,
because it really comes down to because
we've talked a lot about attitude.
Oh, that is first and foremost.
But the thing is, now you're becoming an opportunity.
I hope so. We'll see. It would be nice. I'd like to be able to give the opportunity because it is hard to get to this level. There are still a lot of dedicated people out there that really have a passion for it and got the right stuff. But it's a lot of work, There's a lot of sweat and a lot of grunt work, fortunately, and I shouldn't be talking about that because I bypassed that, which makes it even more unlikely that someone's going to take the same path.
Well, you bypassed it, but you worked for it.
Well, I was just passionate about it, and as it turned out, I had a talent for it. Interesting little anecdote here that is just that this really blew my mind. Now, I was born in Cuba, and after being involved in this for about 10 years, I tried to mansplain to my father, what an equalizer is. I was talking shop, and and he asked me a couple of questions, and I went on to, well, Dad, it's like this. We have this filter set, and there's a different filter for different frequencies across the spectrum, and he looked at me and he nodded and he said, yeah, well, when I was mixing Arturo Toscanini for RCA Victor in the 50s, we used and then he went on to tell me his experience as an audio engineer, at which point my face it turned to jello and my jaw opened, and then he went on to school me on how it was done back in the day, and I was like, what are you talking about? What?
And you
The
didn't know this.
I did not. He didn't say a word. And then my mother, oh, yes. Your father used to, he'd come to New York and do recordings of RCA Victor. And unbeknownst to me, that all the while that I was pursuing this and so passionate about it, that in a previous life, and this was, no, this wasn't in the 50s. This was earlier. This might have been in the 40s.
Okay.
But that he was in fact an accomplished audio engineer back in the day, and I never knew about it.
Wow.
And that kind of, to this day, you wonder, wow, is it like was it predestined? Was it in the genes? Because because when I realized that at 14, 15, looking up at, walking into that arena and seeing that guy sitting up there, that this is it, I'm going to do that,
Yeah.
And it turns out that,
I guess it was just running in your blood.
you gotta wonder,
Yeah.
that's the freakiest, that was by far along this journey, that was one of the biggest shocks that for me was that my father had a background in this, and that he kept it from me, maybe because he was hoping I wouldn't pursue it.
Yeah.
I don't know. In the same way that I don't want my kids to, but my kids are smarter than me, so they won't. They have they will follow a different path.
Well, yeah, but whatever. I mean, my son didn't follow in my footsteps, although he does have talent. He's a drummer. He's a guitarist. He loves music. He loves anything that has to do with music. And strangely enough, never did it professionally, and turned into a car pimper. So whatever, man. I mean,
Is that selling or customizing?
no, he's customizing.
Okay.
He customizes like ambulances and cop cars and SWAT cars and whatever.
Yeah.
And it's funny because probably if I had been doing that, I wouldn't want my son to do it. But
Yeah.
whatever, man. Whatever makes you happy.
Bottom line.
Well, I guess this is the end for now.
Thank you, Claude.
But something tells me we're going to be back on the air again.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Richie.
Thank you, buddy.
It's been a great pleasure, and we're going to get a lot of feedback from this one.
I don't think anybody else sit through this whole thing, but if you do, God bless you.
Well, I'll make an introduction to make sure people sit through it.
All right.
It's really worth it. Take care, man.
Thanks a lot.
See you soon. Bye.
Well, that was the end of the longest running interview I've done so far. The special thanks to AVL Media Group and Avo Lights, who in my opinion make the best lighting consoles in the world. If you'd like to try one out, just give me a call or reach me via BackstageCowboys.com. This is Claude Vien returning you to whatever you were doing before signing in. Stand by, orchestra people, and go!